If the tribunal please, on behalf of the United States Council, I now present to this august tribunal the evidence to establish certain phases of the indictment alleged in count 1 under war crimes and crimes against humanity. And by agreement between the prosecutors, the allegations in count 4, paragraph 10B, crimes against humanity. The topical title of this presentation is The Persecution of the Jews. At this time, I offer in evidence the document books of translation. USA Exhibit, have you the exhibit for the document book? All right. These documents contained in the books are arranged according to the D, the L, the PS, and the R series. And under the series, the translations are listed numerically. This title, The Persecution of the Jews, is singularly inappropriate when weighed in the light of the evidence to follow. Academically, I am told, to persecute is to afflict, harass, and annoy. The term used does not convey, and indeed, I cannot conjure a term that does convey the ultimate aim and the avowed purpose to obliterate the Jewish race. This presentation is not intended to be a complete recital of all the crimes committed against the Jews. The extent and the scope of the crimes was so great that it permeated the entire German nation, its peoples, its organizations. I am informed that others to follow me will offer additional evidence under other phases of the prosecution's case. Evidence relating to the party organizations and state organizations, whose criminality the prosecution will seek to establish, will disclose and emphasize the part that these organizations played in the pattern and plan for annihilation. The French and the Soviet prosecutors, too, have a volume of evidence, all related to this subject, which will be submitted in due course of the trial. Before I begin a recital of the overt acts leading to the elimination of the Jews, I am prepared to show that these acts and policies within Germany from the year 1933 to the end of the war related to the planning, preparation, initiation, and waging of aggressive wars, and thus falling within the definition of crimes against humanity as defined in Article 6C of the Charter. It had long been an established German theory that the First World War ended in Germany's defeat because of a collapse in the zone of the interior. In planning for future wars, it was determined that the home front must be secured to prevent a repetition of this 1918 debacle. Unification of the German people was essential to successful planning and waging of war, and the Nazi political premise must be established: one race, one state, one Führer. Free trade unions must be abolished. Political parties other than the National Socialist Party must be outlawed. Civil liberties must be suspended, and opposition of every kind must be swept away. Loyalty to God, church, and scientific truth were declared to be incompatible with the Nazi regime. The anti-Jewish policy was part of this plan for unification because it was a conviction of the Nazis that the Jews would not contribute to Germany's military program, but on the contrary, would hamper it. The Jew must therefore be eliminated. This view is clearly borne out by a statement contained in document 1919 PS, United States Exhibit 170. This document is a transcript of a hymnless speech at a meeting of the SS Major Generals on 4 October 1943, and from page 4, paragraph 3 of the translation before the court, I read a very short passage. We know how difficult we should have made it for ourselves if with the bombing raids, the burdens and deprivations of war, we still had Jews today in every town as secret saboteurs, agitators, and troublemongers. We would now probably have reached the 1916-17 stage when the Jews were still in the German national body. End of quotation. The treatment of the Jews within Germany was therefore as much of a plan for aggressive war as was the building of armament and the conscription of manpower. It falls within the jurisdiction of this tribunal as an integral part of the planning and preparation to wage a war of aggression. It is obvious that the persecution and murder of Jews throughout the conquered territories of Europe following 1939 are war crimes as defined by Article 6B of the Charter. It further violates Article 46 of the regulations of the Hague Convention of 1907, to which Germany was a signatory. I quote Article 46 and ask the court to take judicial notice thereof. Family honor and rights, the lives of persons and private property, as well as religious convictions and practices, must be respected. I know of no crime in the history of mankind more horrible in its details than the treatment of the Jews. It is intended to establish that the Nazi Party precepts, later incorporated within the policies of the German state, often expressed by the defendants at bar, were to annihilate the Jewish people. I shall seek to avoid the temptation to editorialize or to draw inferences from the documents, however great the provocation. Rather, I shall let the documentary evidence speak for itself. Its stark realism will be unvarnished. Bloodlust may have played some part in these savage crimes, but the underlying purpose and objective, to annihilate the Jewish race, was one of the fundamental principles of the Nazi plan to prepare for and to wage aggressive war. I shall, from this point, limit my proof to the overt acts committed. But I dare to request the court's indulgence, if it is necessary, in weaving a pattern of evidence to make reference to certain documents and evidence previously submitted. Now, this ultimate objective, that is, the elimination and extermination of the Jews, could not be accomplished without preliminary steps and measures. The German state must first be seized by the Nazi Party. The force of world opinion must be faced. And even the regimented German people must be indoctrinated with hatred against the Jews. The first clear-cut evidence of the party policies concerning the Jews was expressed in the party program in February, if I may correct that statement, in February 1920. I offer in evidence document 1708 PS, program of the National Socialist Party, U.S. Exhibit 255. With the court's permission, I would like to quote the relevant part of that program. Paragraph B. Only a member of the race can be a citizen. A member of the race can only be one who is of German blood, without consideration of confession. This, sir, is 1708 PS. And have you a copy of the volume? Volume 2? That is paragraph 4 and paragraph 6, sir, on the first page. Paragraph 4, only a member of the race can be a citizen. A member of the race can only be one who is of German blood, without consideration of confession. Consequently, no Jew can be a member of the race. And again in paragraph 6, the right to determine matters concerning administration and law belongs only to the citizen. Therefore, we demand that every public office of any sort whatsoever, whether in the Reich, the county, or municipality, be filled only by citizens. I now offer document 2662 PS, Mein Kampf, U.S. Exhibit 256. On pages 724, 725, Hitler, in this book, speaking of the Jew, said that if the National Socialist movement was to fulfill its task, and I quote, it must open the eyes of the people with regard to foreign nations and must remind them again and again of the true enemy of our present-day world. In the place of hate against Aryans, from whom we may be separated by almost everything, to whom, however, we are tied by common blood or a great tie of a common culture, it must dedicate to the general anger the evil enemy of mankind as the true cause of all suffering. It must see to it, however, that at least in our country, he be recognized as the most mortal enemy, and that the struggle against him may show like a flaming beacon of a better era to other nations too, the road to salvation for a struggling Aryan mankind. A flood of abusive literature of all types and for all age groups was published and circulated throughout Germany. Illustrative of this type of publication is the book entitled Der Giftpelz. I offer in evidence document 1778 PS, U.S. Exhibit 257. This book brands the Jew as a persecutor of the labor class, as a race defiler, devil in human form, a poisonous mushroom, and a murderer. This particular book instructed school children to recognize the Jew by caricature of his physical features, shown on page 6 and 7. Taught them that the Jew abuses little boys and girls, on page 30, and that the Jewish Bible permits all crimes, pages 13 and 17. The Defendant Stryker's periodical, Die Stürmer, number 14, April 1937, in particular, went to such extremes as to publish the statement that Jews at the ritual celebration of their Passover slaughtered Christians. I offer document 2699 PS, U.S. Exhibit 258. On page 2, column 1, paragraphs 6 to 9, I quote, "Also, the numerous confessions made by the Jews show that the execution of ritual murders is a law of the Talmud Jew. The former chief rabbi and later monk, Theophyti, declared that the ritual murders take place especially on the Jewish Purim, in memory of the Persian murders, and Passover, in memory of the murder of Christ. The instructions are as follows. The blood of the victims is to be tapped by force. On Passover, it is to be used in wine and matzahs. Thus, a small part of the blood is to be poured into the dough of the matzahs and into the wine. The mixing is done by the Jewish head of the family. The procedure is as follows. The family head empties a few drops of the fresh and powdered blood into a glass, wets the fingers of the left hand with it, and sprays, blesses with it, everything on the table. The head of the family then says, "Thus we ask God to send the 10 plagues to all enemies of the Jewish faith." Then they eat, and at the end the head of the family exclaims, "May all Gentiles perish as the child whose blood is contained in the bread and wine." The fresh or dried and powdered blood of the slaughtered is further used by young married Jewish couples, by pregnant Jewesses, for circumcision, and so on. Ritual murder is recognized by all Talmud Jews. The Jew believes he absolves himself thus of his sins. It is difficult for our minds to grasp that falsehoods such as these could fall on fertile soil, that a literate nation could read, digest, or believe. We must realize, however, that with a rigidly controlled press, which precluded an expose of such lying propaganda, that some of the ignorant and gullible would be led to believe. I now offer in evidence document 2697 PS, copy of the Stürmer, U.S. Exhibit 259. This publication, Die Stürmer, was published by the Defendant Stryker's publishing firm. In this publication, Stryker, speaking of the Jewish faith, said, The Holy Scripture is a horrible criminal romance abounding with murder, incest, fraud, and indecency. And again he said, the Talmud is the great Jewish book of crimes that the Jew practices in his daily life. This is contained in document 2698 PS, Der Stürmer, which I now offer in evidence. U.S. Exhibit 260. You won't need that. This propaganda campaign of hate was too widespread and notorious to require further elaboration. Within the documents offered in evidence, in this and in other phases of the case, will be found similar and even more scurrilous statements, many by the defendants themselves and others by their accomplices. When the Nazi Party gained control of the German state, a new and terrible weapon against the Jews was placed within their grasp: the power to apply the force of the state against them. This was done by the issuance of decrees. Jewish immigrants were denaturalized. 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 480, signed by defendants Frick and Nuremberg. Native Jews were precluded from citizenship. 1935 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1146, signed by defendant Frick. Jews were forbidden to live in marriage or to have extramarital relations with persons of Jewish blood. 1935 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1146, signed by Frick and Hess. Jews were denied the right to vote. 1936 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 133, signed by defendant Frick. Jews were denied the right to hold public office or civil service positions. Reichsgesetzblatt, 1933, Part 1, page 277, signed by defendant Frick. It was determined to relegate the Jews to an inferior status by denying them common privileges and freedom. Thus, they were denied access to certain city areas, sidewalks, transportation, places of amusement, restaurants. 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1676. Progressively, more and still more stringent measures were applied, even to the denial of private pursuits. They were excluded from the practice of dentistry. 1939 Reichsgesetzblatt 1, Part, page 47, signed by defendant Hess. Practice of law was denied. 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1403, signed by defendants Frick and Hess. The practice of medicine was denied. 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 969, signed by defendants Frick and Hess. They were denied employment by press and radio. 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 661. From stock exchanges and stock brokerage. 1934 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 169. And even from farming. 1933 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 685. Attended by defendant Funk, among others, held at 11 o'clock on 12 November 1938 at the Reich Ministry for Air. From pages 8 and 9 of Section 7, I quote the defendant Goering. One more question, gentlemen. What would you think the situation would be if I announced today that Jewry, from the English, sir, is the middle of page 22. One more question, gentlemen. What would you think the situation would be if I announced today that Jewry shall have to contribute this $1 billion as a punishment? And then the last paragraph on page 22 of the translation before the court, I quote, "I shall close the wording this way, that German Jewry shall, as punishment for their abominable crimes, etc., etc., have to make a contribution of $1 billion. That'll work. The pigs won't commit another murder. I'd like to say again that I would not like to be a Jew in Germany." It was whimsical remarks such as these that originated decrees. For following this meeting, a decree was issued placing upon the German Jews the burden of a $1 billion Reichsmark fine. 1938 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 1579, dated 12 November 1938, signed by the defendant Goering. Similar decrees were contained in 1939 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 282, signed by defendant Goering. 1941 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 722, signed by defendants Frick and Bormann. Finally, in the year 1943, the Jews were placed beyond the protection of any judicial process by a decree signed by the defendants Bormann and Frick and others, and the police became the sole arbiters of punishment and death. 1943 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 372, signed by Frick and Bormann. I ask the court to take judicial notice of the Reichsgesetzblatt decrees cited. Side by side with the passage of these decrees and their execution went still another weapon wielded by the party and the party-controlled state. These were the openly sponsored and official anti-Jewish boycotts against the Jews. I offer document 2409 PS, the published diary of Joseph Goebbels, U.S. Exhibit 262. And I invite the court's attention, page 290, where under date of 29 March 1933, court will find the quotation on the top of page 1 of the translation of 2409. I quote, "The boycott appeal is approved by the entire cabinet." And again on the 31st of March 1933, he wrote on page 1 and the first sentence of page 5, paragraph 5 rather. "We are having a last discussion among a very small circle and decide that the boycott is to start tomorrow with all severity. The defendant Streicher and the defendant Frank, together with Himmler, Ley, and others, were members of a central committee who conducted the 1933 boycott against the Jews. Their names are listed in document 2156 PS, National Socialist Party Correspondence, 29 March 1943, U.S. Exhibit 263. As early as 1933, violence against the Jews was undertaken. Raids were conducted by uniformed Nazis on services within synagogues. Attending members of the synagogues were assaulted, and religious insignia and emblems were desecrated. A report of such an occurrence is contained in the official dispatch from the American Consul General in Leipzig, dated 5 April 1943. I offer in evidence document 2709 PS, only, sir, to show the names of the defendants Stryker and Frank as members of the members of the boycott committee, sir. Document 2709 has been given U.S. Exhibit number 265. From paragraph 1 of page 1, I quote, "In Dresden several weeks ago, uniformed Nazis raided the Jewish prayer house, interrupted the evening religious service, arrested 25 worshipers, and tore the holy insignia or emblems from the head covering worn while praying. At a meeting here in Nuremberg, before the representatives of the German press, the defendant Stryker and Mayor Leibel of Nuremberg revealed in advance to the gathered members of the press that the Nuremberg synagogue would be destroyed. I offer in evidence document 1724 PS, U.S. Exhibit 266, which are minutes of this meeting, dated 4 August 1938. From page 1, paragraph 4 of the original, I quote the translation before the court. "The breaking up of the synagogue. Information must still be secret. On August 10, 1938, at 10 o'clock a.m., the breakup of the synagogues will commence. Gaull leader Julius Stryker will personally set the crane into motion with which the Jewish symbols, Star of David, etc., will be torn down. This should be arranged in a big way. Closer details are still unknown. The defendant Stryker himself supervised the demolition. In support of this, I offer document 2711 PS, a newspaper account of 11 August 1938, U.S. Exhibit 267. Paragraph 1 of the translation before the court. In Nuremberg, the synagogue is being demolished. Julius Stryker himself inaugurates the work by a speech lasting more than an hour and a half. By his orders, then, so to speak, as a prelude of the demolition, the tremendous Star of David came off the cupola." End of quotation. These accounts of violence were not localized anti-Semitic demonstrations, but were directed and ordered from a centralized headquarters in Berlin. This is established by a series of teletype messages sent by the Berlin secret state police headquarters to chief police throughout Germany on 10 November 1938, which contained instructions pertaining to the prearranged demonstration. I now refer to document 2051 PS, previously offered in evidence as U.S. Exhibit 240. I shall quote the relevant part of one of these confidential orders signed by Heydrich. The translation before the court, the last half of page 2. Yes. 3051, sir, I'm sorry. Because of the attempt on the life of Secretary of the Legation von Rath in Paris tonight, 9-10 November 1938, demonstrations against Jews are to be expected throughout the Reich. The following instructions are given on how to treat these events. 1. The chiefs of the state police or their deputies must get in telephonic contact with the political leaders who have jurisdiction over their districts and have to arrange a joint meeting with the appropriate inspector or commander of the order police to discuss the organization of the demonstrations. At these discussions, the political leaders have to be informed that the German police have received from the Reichsführer SS and Chief of the German Police the following instructions, in accordance with which the political leaders should adjust their own measures. A. Only such measures should be taken which do not involve danger to German life or property. For instance, synagogues are to be burned down only when there is no danger of fire to the surroundings. B. Business and private apartments of Jews may be destroyed, but not looted. The police is instructed to supervise the execution of this order and to arrest looters. End of the quotation. To this point, we have found a gradual and a mounting emphasis in the campaign against the Jews, one of the basic tenets of the Nazi Party and of the state. The flame of prejudice has now been lighted and fanned. The German people, to a large degree, indoctrinated, and the seeds of hatred have been sown. The German state is now armed and is prepared for conquest, and the force of world opinion can now safely be ignored. Already they have forced out of Germany 200,000 of the original 500,000 Jews. The Nazi-controlled German state is therefore emboldened, and Hitler, in anticipation of the aggressive wars already planned, cast about for a whipping boy upon whose shoulders can be placed the blame for the world catastrophe yet to come. His speech before the Reichstag on 30 January 1939 is set forth in document 2663 PS, which I now offer in evidence. U.S. Exhibit 268. I quote, 2663 PS, a very short excerpt, sir. If the international Jewish financiers, within and without Europe, succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, the results will not be the Bolshevization of the world and the victory of Jewry, but the obliteration of the Jewish race in Europe. It contained 27,000 apartments with an average of 2.5 rooms each. It was separated from the rest of the city by partition and other walls, and by walling up of thoroughfares, windows, doors, open spaces, etc. Some idea of the conditions within this ghetto can be gathered from the fact that an average of 6 persons lived in every room. Himmler received a report from the SS Brigade Führer Group A, dated 15 October 1941, which further illustrates the establishment and operation of the ghettos. I offer document L180 in evidence. U.S. number 276. The translation, if the court please, is the second paragraph from the bottom of page 9, document L180. Apart from organizing and carrying out measures of execution, the creation of ghettos was begun in the larger towns at once during the first days of operation. This was especially urgent in Kovno because there were 30,000 Jews in a total population of 152,400. And then from the last paragraph on page 9, continuing to page 10, I quote, "In Riga, the so-called Moscow suburb was designated as a ghetto. This is the worst dwelling district in Riga, already now mostly inhabited by Jews. The transfer of the Jews into the ghetto district proved rather difficult because the Latvians dwelling in this district had to be evacuated, and residential space in Riga is very crowded. 24,000 of the 28,000 Jews living in Riga have been transferred into the ghetto so far. In creating the ghetto, the security police restricted themselves to mere policing duties, while the establishment and administration of the ghetto, as well as the regulation of the food supply for the inmates of the ghetto, were left to civil administration. The labor officers were left in charge of Jewish labor. In the other towns with a larger Jewish population, ghettos shall be established likewise." Jews were also forced into ghettos in the Polish province of Galicia. No words in my vocabulary could describe quite so adequately the conditions as those contained in the report from Katzman, Lieutenant General of the Police, to Kruger, General of the Police East, dated 30 June 1943, entitled "Solution of Jewish Question in Galicia." I offer document L18 in evidence. U.S. Exhibit 277. From the translation, if the court please, shall begin on the last three sentences on page 11. That is the last three sentences prior to the word map, which is a break there on that page. Nothing but catastrophical conditions were found in the ghettos of Rabaruska and Rohayden.
Where is this?
This, sir, is on page 11. Would be 3, 6, about 8 lines above the end of the bottom of the page, sir. Beginning with the word nothing but catastrophical conditions.
They got it? Yes.
The Jews of Rabaruska, fearing the evacuation, had concealed those suffering from spotted fever in underground holes. When evacuation was to start, the police found that 3,000 Jews suffering from spotted fever lay about in this ghetto. In order to destroy this center of pestilence at once, every police officer inoculated against spotted fever was called into action. Thus we succeeded to destroy this plague boil, losing thereby only one officer. Almost the same conditions were found in Rohayden. And on page 19 of this same document, L18, last paragraph, I wish to further quote.
Yes.
Since we received more and more alarming reports on the Jews becoming armed in an ever-increasing manner, we started during the last fortnight, in June 1943, an action throughout the whole of the district of Galicia with the intent to use strongest measures to destroy the Jewish gangsterism. Special measures were found necessary during the action to dissolve the ghetto in Lvov, where the dugout mentioned above had been established. Here we had to act brutally from the beginning in order to avoid losses on our side. We had to blow up or to burn down several houses. On this occasion, the surprising fact arose that we were able to catch about 20,000 Jews instead of 12,000 Jews who had registered. We had to pull at least 3,000 Jewish corpses out of every kind of hiding place. They had committed suicide by taking poison. And on page 20 of this document, third paragraph, I read, despite the extraordinary burden heaped upon every single SS police officer during these actions, mood and spirit of the men were extraordinarily good and praiseworthy from the first to the last day. these acts and actions of removal and slaughter were not entirely without profit. The author of this report, on the 9th page of this translated copy, stated, and I quote, the last paragraph, together with the evacuated action, we executed the confiscation of Jewish property. Very high amounts were confiscated and paid over to the Special Staff Reinhardt. Apart from furniture and many textile goods, the following amounts were confiscated and turned over to Special Staff Reinhardt. I would like to read a few of the many and assorted items listed under this confiscation. 20.952 kilograms of gold wedding rings. 7 stamp collections complete. A suitcase filled with pocket knives. A basket of fountain pens and propelled pencils. 3 bags filled with rings, not genuine. 35 wagons of fur. I will not burden the court with the detailed list of objects of value and the money confiscated, but the foregoing is cited to illustrate the thoroughness of the looting of a defenseless people, even to the 11 and 73/100 kilograms of gold teeth and inlays. By the end of 1942, Jews in the general government of Poland had been crowded into 55 localities, whereas before the German invasion there had been approximately 1,000 Jewish settlements within the same area. This is reported in the 1942 Official Gazette for the General Government, number 94, page 665, 1 November 1942. The Jews, having been registered and confined within the ghettos, now furnished a reservoir for slave labor. It is believed pertinent at this time to point out the difference between slave labor and labor duty. The latter group were entitled to reasonable compensation, stated work hours, medical care and attention, and other social security measures, while the former were granted none of these advantages, being in fact a level below a slave. The defendant Rosenberg, as Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories, set up within his organization a department which, among other things, was to seek a solution for the Jewish problem by means of forced labor. His plans are contained in another captured document, 1024 PS, which I now offer in evidence. U.S. Exhibit 278. I quote the first part of paragraph 3 on page 1 of the document entitled General Organizations and Tasks of Our Office for the General Handling of Problems in the Eastern Territories. This is dated 29 April 1941. This brief excerpt reads as follows. A general treatment is required for the Jewish problem, for which a temporary solution will have to be determined. Forced labor for the Jews, creation of the ghettos, etc. End of quotation. Thereafter, he issued instructions that Jewish forced labor should be effected and utilized for every manual labor. And I refer to document 212 PS, already in evidence, U.S. Exhibit number 272. From page 2 of this document, correction of the court, please, page 3, paragraph 5 and paragraph 7. I quote, paragraph 5, the standing rule that Jewish labor employment in the complete and unyielding use of Jewish manpower, regardless of age, in the reconstruction of the occupied Eastern Territories. And from paragraph 7 on the same page I read, violations against German measures, especially against the forced labor regulations, are to be punished by death to the Jews. From the ghettos, Jewish labor was selected and sent to a concentration area. Here the usable Jews were screened from those considered worthless. For example, a contingent of 45,000 Jews would be expected to yield 10,000 to 15,000 usable laborers. My authority for that statement is contained in an RSHA telegram to Himmler, marked urgent and secret, dated 16 December 1942. I offer this document, 1472 PS, in evidence. U.S. Exhibit 279. And from the translation before the court, I read the last 4 lines. In the total of 45,000 are included physically handicapped and others, old Jews and children. In making a distribution for this purpose, at least 10,000 to 15,000 laborers will be available when the Jews arrive at Auschwitz are assigned. From document L18, a report from the Lieutenant General of the Police, Katzman, to General of the Police East, Kruger, already in evidence, U.S. Exhibit 277. We find the clearly outlined nature of the forced labor situation for the Jews. On page 2 of the translation, starting with paragraph 6, I read, the best remedy consisted of the formation by the SS and police leader of forced labor camps. The best opportunity for labor was offered by the necessity to complete the DG4 road, which was extremely important, and necessary for the whole of the southern part of the front, and which was in a catastrophically bad condition. On October 15, 1941, the establishment of camps along the road was commenced, and despite considerable difficulties there existed, after a few weeks only, 7 camps containing 4,000 Jews. From page 2, paragraph 7, I read. Soon more camps followed those first ones, so that after a very short time, the completion of 15 camps of this kind could be reported to the superior leader of SS and police. In the course of time, about 20,000 Jewish laborers passed through these camps. Despite the hardly imaginable difficulties occurring at this work, I can report today that about 160 kilometers of this road are completed. And from page 2, paragraph 8, I read. At the same time, all other Jews fit for work were registered and distributed for useful work by the labor agencies. And on page 5, last part of paragraph 1,
well, don't you want the remainder of that paragraph on page 2?
Such a lengthy document, sir, I had hesitated to burden the record with so much of it and had extracted certain portions therefrom, but I shall be very glad to
well, the sentence
read
I'm
it into the
referring
record.
to is that thing up. When, for instance, the municipal administration in Lvov had no success in their attempts to house the Jews within a close district, which would be inhabited only by Jews, this question too was solved quickly by the SS and police leader through his subordinate officials.
Yes, sir, I shall, with the court's permission, add that to the record. Reading on the last paragraph of page 2, when the Jews were marked by the Star of David, as well as when they were registered by the labor agencies, the first symptoms appeared in their attempts to dodge the orders of the authorities. The measures which were introduced thereupon led to thousands of arrests. It became more and more apparent that the civil administration was not in a position to solve the Jewish problem in an approximately satisfactory manner. Then, for instance, the municipal administration at Lvov had no success in their attempts to house the Jews within a closed district which would be inhabited only by Jews. This question, too, was solved quickly by the SS and police leader through his subordinate officials. This measure became the more urgent as the winter 1941 big centers of spotted fever were noted in many parts of the town. And on page 5 of this document L18, last half of paragraph 1, I read, during this removal of the Jews into a certain quarter of the town, several sluices were erected, at which all the work-shy and asocial Jewish rabble were caught during the screening and treated in a special way. Owing to the peculiar fact that almost 90% of artisans working in Galicia were Jews, the task to be solved could be fulfilled only step by step since an immediate evacuation would not have served the interests of war economy. And again on page 5, paragraph 2, the latter part, beginning with cases were discovered. Cases were discovered where Jews, in order to acquire any certificate of labor, not only renounced all wages, but even paid money themselves. Moreover, the organizing of Jews for the benefit of their employers grew to such catastrophical extent that it was deemed necessary to interfere in the most energetic manner for the benefit of the German name. Since the administration was not in a position and showed itself too weak to master this chaos, the SS and police leader simply took over the entire disposition of labor for Jews. The Jewish labor agencies, which were manned by hundreds of Jews, were dissolved. All certificates of labor given by firms or administrative offices were declared invalid, and the card given to the Jews by the labor agencies were revalidated by the police officers by stamping them. In the course of this action, again, thousands of Jews were caught who were in possession of forged certificates or who had obtained surreptitiously certificates of labor by all kinds of pretexts. These Jews also were exposed to special treatment. If the court please, at this time, I would like to arrange for the showing of a very short motion picture. Perhaps one of the most unusual exhibits that will be presented during the trial. And with the court's permission, I would like to call upon Commander Donovan to assist.
Need we adjourn for it or not?
No, sir. Probably the movie itself is very, very short, sir.
Very well.
May it please the tribunal. The United States now offers in evidence document number 3052-PS, United States Exhibit number 280, entitled Original German 8mm Film of Atrocities Against Jews. This is a strip of motion pictures taken, we believe, by a member of the SS and captured by United States military forces in an SS barracks near Augsburg, Germany, as described in the affidavits now before the tribunal. We have not been able to establish beyond doubt in which area these films were made, but we believe that to be immaterial. The film offers undeniable evidence made by Germans themselves of almost incredible brutality to Jewish people in the custody of the Nazis, including German military units. It is believed by the prosecution that the scene is the extermination of a ghetto by Gestapo agents, assisted by military units. And as the other evidence to be presented by the prosecution will indicate, the scene presented to the tribunal is probably one which occurred 1,000 times all over Europe under the Nazi rule of terror. This film was made on an 8mm home camera. We have not wished even to reprint it, and so shall present the original untouched film captured by our troops. The pictures obviously were taken by an amateur photographer. Because of this, because of the fact that part of it is burned, because of the fact that it runs for only 1.5 minutes, and because of the confusion on every hand shown in this film, we do not believe that the tribunal can properly view the evidence if it is shown only once. We therefore ask the tribunal's permission to project the film twice, which we did before defense counsel. This is a silent film. The film has been made available to all defense counsel, and they have a copy of the supporting affidavits duly translated. May it please the tribunal, while the film is being rewound, I wish to say that attached to the affidavits offered in evidence is a description of every picture shown in this film. And with the tribunal's permission, I wish to read a few selections from that at this time before again projecting the film in order to direct the tribunal's attention to certain of the scenes. Scene 2, a naked girl running across the courtyard. Scene 3, an older woman being pushed past the camera. A man in SS uniform standing at the right of the scene. Number 5, a man with a skull cap and a woman are manhandled. Number 14, a half-naked woman runs through the crowd. Number 15, another half-naked woman runs out of the house. Number 16, 2 men drag an old man out. Number 18, a man in German military uniform with his back to the camera watches. Number 24, a general shot of the street showing fallen bodies and naked women running. Number 32, a shot of the street showing 5 fallen bodies. Number 37, a man with a bleeding head is hit again. Number 39, a soldier in German military uniform with a rifle stands by as a crowd centers on a man coming out of the house. Number 44, a soldier with a rifle in German military uniform walks past a woman clinging to a torn blouse. Number 45, a woman is dragged by her hair across the street. We submit to the tribunal for its permanent records this strip of 8mm film.
It is difficult from this point to follow the thread of chronological order or a topical outline. So numerous are the documents and so appalling the contents that in this brief recital the prosecution will make no effort to itemize all the criminal acts. Selected documents, however, will unfold the crimes in full detail. Before launching a discussion of the means utilized to accomplish the ultimate aim, that is, the extermination of the Jewish people, I now turn to that fertile source of evidence, the diary of Hans Frank, then Governor General of occupied Poland. In a cabinet session on Tuesday, 16 December 1941, in the government building at Krakow, the defendant Frank made a closing address to the session. I offer in evidence that part of document number 2233D, PS, U.S. Exhibit 281, identified CV 1941, October to December, and from page 76, line 10, to page 77, line 33 of the original, and of the entire translation before the court marked 2233D PS. I quote, "As far as the Jews are concerned, I want to tell you quite frankly that they must be done away with in one way or another. The Fuhrer once said, should united Jewry again succeed in provoking a world war, the blood of not only the nations which have been forced into the war by them will be shed, but the Jew will have found his end in Europe. I know that many of the measures carried out against the Jews in the Reich at present are being criticized. It is being tried intentionally, as is obvious from the reports on the morale, to talk about cruelty, harshness, etc. Before I continue, I want to beg you to agree with me on the following formula. We will principally have pity on the German people only, and nobody else in the whole world. The others had no pity on us. As an old National Socialist, I must say, this war would only be a partial success if the whole lot of Jewry would survive it, while we would have shed our best blood in order to save Europe. My attitude toward the Jews will, therefore, be based only on the expectation that they must disappear. They must be done away with. I have entered negotiations to have them deported to the East. A great discussion concerning that question will take place in Berlin in January, at which I am going to delegate the State Secretary, Dr. Bulletin. That discussion is to take place in the Reich Security Main Office with SS Lieutenant General Heydrich. A great Jewish migration will begin in any case. For what is to be done with the Jews? Do you think they will be settled down in the Ausland, in villages? That is what we were told in Berlin. Why all this bother? We can do nothing with them, either in the Ausland or in the Reich Commissariat. So liquidate them yourselves. Gentlemen, I must ask you to rid yourselves of all feeling of pity. We must annihilate the Jew, wherever we find them and wherever it is possible, in order to maintain there the structure of the Reich as a whole. This will naturally be achieved by other methods than those pointed out by Bureau Chief Dr. Hummel. Nor can the judges of the special courts be made responsible for it because of the limitations of the framework of the legal procedure. Such outdated views cannot be applied to such gigantic and unique events. We must find, at any rate, a way which leads to the goal, and my thoughts are working in that direction. The Jews represent for us also extraordinarily malignant gluttons. We have now approximately 2,500,000 of them in the general government. Perhaps with the Jewish mixture and everything that goes with it, 3,500,000 Jews. We cannot shoot or poison these 3,500,000 Jews, but we shall nevertheless be able to take measures which will lead somehow to their annihilation. And this in connection with the gigantic measures to be determined in discussions from the right. The general government must become free of Jews, the same as the Reich. Where and how this is to be accomplished is a matter for the offices which we must appoint and create here. Their activities will be brought to your attention in due course. End of the quotation. This, if the tribunal please, is not the planning and the scheming of an individual, but it is the expression of an official of the German state, the appointed Governor General of occupied Poland. The methods used to accomplish the annihilation of the Jewish people were varied, and although not subtle, were highly successful. I have from time to time made reference to certain utterances and actions of the defendant Rosenberg as one of the leaders and policymakers of the Nazi Party in German state. It is perhaps reasonable to assume that the defendant Rosenberg will claim for many of his acts that he pursued them pursuant to superior orders. But I have before me, however, a captured document number 001 PS, marked secret, dated 18 December 1941, entitled Documentary Memorandum for the Fuhrer concerning Jewish possessions in France, U.S. Exhibit 282. I dare say that no document before this tribunal will more clearly evidence the defendant Rosenberg's personal attitude, his temperament, and his convictions toward the Jews more strongly than this memorandum, wherein he, on his own initiative, urges plundering and death. I offer in evidence this document 001 PS. The body of the memorandum reads as follows. In compliance with the order of the Führer for protection of Jewish cultural possessions, a great number of Jewish dwellings remain unguarded. Consequently, many furnishings have disappeared because a guard could naturally not be posted. In the whole East, the administration has found terrible conditions in living quarters, and the chances of procurement are so limited that it is not practical to procure any more. Therefore, I beg the Führer to permit the seizure of all Jewish home furnishings of Jews in Paris who have fled or who will leave shortly, and that of Jews living in all parts of the occupied West, to relieve the shortage of furnishings in the administration in the East. A great number of leading Jews were, after a short examination in Paris, again released. The attempts on the lives of members of the armed forces have not stopped. On the contrary, they continue. This reveals an unmistakable plan to disrupt the German-French cooperation, to force Germany to retaliate, and with this, evoke a new defense on the part of the French against Germany. I suggest to the Führer that instead of executing 100 Frenchmen, we substitute 100 Jewish bankers, lawyers, etc. It is the Jews in London and New York who incite the French communists to commit acts of violence, and it seems only fair that the members of this race should pay for this. It is not the little Jews, but the leading Jews in France who should be held responsible. This would tend to awaken the anti-Jewish sentiment. Signed, A. Rosenberg.
Dr. Thoma für den Angeklagten Rosenberg.
May I ask you to speak slowly?
Yes.
So that your application may come to me through the earphones correctly. Yes?
Ich bitte, die Gelegenheit ergreifen zu dürfen, in dem Augenblick, in dem der Herr Anklagevertreter sich mit meinem Mandanten Rosenberg beschäftigt, eine Objection zu der Vorlage des Dokuments 212 PS US Exhibit 272 vorbringen zu dürfen. Der Herr Anklagevertreter hat behauptet, dieses Dokument sei eine Instruktion des Ostministers gewesen. Es beginnt mit den Worten "The competency of the Chief of the Security Police and Security Service" und schließt mit den Worten "Violations against German measures, especially against the forced labor regulations, are to be punishable by these to the Jews."
None of that's come through on the earphones.
The translator's doing nothing.
I don't understand you.
You better begin again.
Der Herr Anklagevertreter hat vorhin ein Dokument vorgelegt. 212 PS US Exhibit 2 Seal 2 und hat behauptet, das sei eine Instruktion des Ostministers über die Behandlung der Juden. In diesem Dokument habe er angeordnet, dass Verletzungen gegen deutsche Maßnahmen, insbesondere gegen den Arbeitszwang, gegenüber den Juden nur mit Todesstrafe geahndet werden. Dieses Dokument stammt nicht vom Angeklagten Rosenberg. Es ist auch nicht irgendwie versehen.
Wait. More slowly, please.
Dieses Dokument stammt nicht von dem Angeklagten Rosenberg. Es hat weder Datum, noch eine Adresse, noch seine Unterschrift. Ich lege deshalb gegen die Behauptung, dass dieses Dokument vom Angeklagten Rosenberg stamme, Einspruch ein.
Wait a minute. I don't think that counsel for the prosecution said that document 212 PS emanated from Rosenberg. I didn't so understand him.
Ich habe ihn dahin verstanden, dass es eine Instruktion des Ostministers gewesen sei. Und wenn ich mich nicht irre, hat er auch gesagt, sie stamme vom April 1941. Zu jener Zeit hat ein Ostministerium noch gar nicht bestanden. Rosenberg wurde erst im Juli 1941 zum Ostminister ernannt.
Well, I'll ask the counsel for the prosecution.
My understanding, sir, that document, 212 PS, was taken from the captured files of defendant Rosenberg.
But it's not, he's not supposed to be.
Das ist richtig. Das ist bei dem Angeklagten Rosenberg gefunden worden. Der Angeklagte Rosenberg behauptet aber, er habe das...
Don't go too fast.
Der Angeklagte Rosenberg behauptet aber, er habe dieses Dokument nie gesehen. Er kenne es nicht. Es sei nie durch seine Hände gegangen.
Well, keep the things here. You see, Rosenberg, when he's called as a witness, or when you appear to speak for him, will be able to say that he's never seen the document before. All that counsel for the prosecution has said, and it appears to be true, is that the document was found in Rosenberg's file. You can say or prove by Rosenberg's evidence, when you call Rosenberg, if you do call him, that he never saw the document. You understand?
Now, may it please the tribunal, during the last session, the prosecution presented briefly the preliminary steps leading to the ultimate objective of the Nazi Party and the Nazi-controlled state. That is, the extermination of the Jews. Propaganda, decrees, the infamous Nuremberg laws, boycotts, registration, and ghettoization were the initial measures in the program. I shall, with the court's permission, continue with a discussion of the methods utilized for the annihilation of the Jewish people. I would like to first discuss starvation. Policies were designed and adopted to deprive the Jews of the most elemental necessities of life. Again, the defendant, Hans Frank, then Governor General of Poland, wrote in his diary that hunger rations were introduced in the Warsaw Ghetto. And referring to the new food regulations in August 1942, he callously and perhaps casually noted that by these food regulations, he virtually condemned more than 1 million Jews to death. I offer in evidence that part of document 2233E, PS, Diary of Hans Frank, conference volume, 24 August 1942, U.S. Exhibit 283.
What letters of 2233?
That is 2233E, PS.
Thank you.
And I quote, that we sentence 1,200,000 Jews to die of hunger should be noted only marginally. It is a matter of course that, should the Jews not starve to death, it would, we hope, result in a speeding up of the anti-Jewish measures. End of the quotation. Frank's diary was not the only guide to the deliberate policy of starvation of the Jews. They were prohibited from pursuing agricultural activities in order to cut them off from access to source of food. I offer document 1138 PS in evidence, U.S. Exhibit 284. And I refer the court to page 4 of the translation, marked with the Roman numeral 5, paragraphs A and B. The document is entitled Provisional Directive on the Treatment of Jews, and it was issued by the Reich Kommissar for the Ostland. I read, Jews must be cleaned out from the countryside. The Jews are to be removed from all trades, especially from trade with agricultural products and other foodstuff. End of quotation. Jews were excluded from the purchase of basic foods such as wheat products, meat, eggs, and milk. And I offer in evidence document 1347 PS. U.S. Exhibit 285. And I quote from paragraph 2 on the first page of the translation before the court. This is an original decree dated 18 September 1942 from the Ministry of Agriculture. I quote, Jews will no longer receive the following food, beginning with the 42nd distribution period, 19 October 1942. Meat, meat products, eggs, wheat products, cake, white bread, wheat rolls, wheat flour, etc. Whole milk, fresh skimmed milk, as well as such foods distributed not on food ration cards issued uniformly throughout the Reich, but on local surprise certificates or by special announcement of the nutrition office on extra coupons of the food cards. Jewish children and young people over 10 years of age will receive the bread ration of the normal consumer. The sick, the old, and the pregnant mothers were excluded from the special food concessions allotted to non-Jews. Seizure by the state police of food shipments to Jews from abroad was authorized, and the Jewish ration cards were distinctly marked with the letter Jew in color across the face of the cards so that the storekeepers could readily identify and discriminate against Jewish purchasers. The Czechoslovakian government published in 1943 an official document entitled Czechoslovakia Fights Back. I offer this book in evidence, document 1689 PS, U.S. Exhibit 286. To summarize the contents of page 110, it states that the Jewish food purchases were confined to certain areas and to certain days and hours. As might be expected, the period permitted for the purchases was during the time when food stocks were likely to be exhausted. By special order number 44 for the Eastern Occupied Territories, dated 4 November 1941, the Jews were limited to rations as low as only 1/2 of the lowest basic category of other people, and the Ministry of Agriculture was empowered to exclude Jews entirely or partially from obtaining food, thus exposing the Jewish community to death by starvation. I now offer in evidence document L165. What's that, sir?
1689 PS.
Just to summarize, sir, the contents of page 110.
I see it. Now you're referring to L?
L165,
Yes.
Your Honor. U.S. Exhibit 287. I refer the court to the last half of the first paragraph of the translation. This is a press bulletin issued by the Polish Ministry of Information, dated 15 November 1942. The Polish ministry concludes that upon the basis of the nature of the separate rationing and the amount of food available to Jews in the Warsaw and Krakow ghettos, the system was designed to bring about starvation. And from the quotation, I read, "In regard to food supplies, they are brought under a completely separate system, which is obviously aimed at depriving them of the most elemental necessities of life." End of quotation.
See what it is? Yeah, last paragraph. Conclusion of the first paragraph. Yeah, first paragraph.
I would now like to discuss annihilation within the ghettos. Justice Jackson, in his opening address to the tribunal, made reference to document 1061 PS. The Warsaw Ghetto is no more. Marked USA Exhibit 275. This finest example of ornate German craftsmanship, leather-bound, profusely illustrated, typed on heavy bond paper, is the almost unbelievable recital of a proud accomplishment by Major General of the Police, Stroop, who signed the report with a bold hand. General Stroop, in this report, first pays tribute to the bravery and the heroism of the German forces who participated in the ruthless and merciless action against a helpless, defenseless group of Jews, numbering, to be exact, 56,065, including, of course, the infants and the women. In this document, he proceeds to relate the day-by-day account of the ultimate accomplishment of his mission, to destroy and to obliterate the Warsaw Ghetto. According to this report, the ghetto, which was established in Warsaw in November 1940, was inhabited by about 400,000 Jews. And prior to the action for the destruction of this ghetto, some 316,000 had already been deported. The court will note that this report is approximately 75 pages in length, and the prosecution believes that the contents are of such striking evidentiary value that no part should be omitted from the permanent records of the tribunal, and that the tribunal should consider the entire report in judging the guilt of these defendants. The defendants were furnished with several photostatic copies of the entire document at least 20 days ago, and have had ample time, I am sure, to scrutinize it in detail. If the court, in the exercise of its judgment, determines that the entire report may be accepted in toto, the prosecution believes that the reading of a portion of the summary, together with brief excerpts from the daily teletype reports, will suffice for the oral record. I would like the court to examine it, if I may, present it to the court, this together with the duplicate original thereof, and ask that the court rule that the entire document may be accepted.
Major Walsh, the court will take that course, provided that the prosecution supply, as soon as possible, both to the Soviet and to the French members of the tribunal, copies in Russian and French of the whole document.
Yes, sir. May I consult with the American...
I don't say present immediately, yes, but present as soon as possible.
Yes.
You're going to read the passages that
Yes.
you think necessary.
From page 6 of the translation before the court of document 1061 PS, I would like to read the boastful but nonetheless vivid account of some of this ruthless action within the Warsaw Ghetto. I quote, second paragraph, page 6. The resistance put up by the Jews and bandits could be broken only by relentlessly using all our forces and energy by day and night. On 23 April 1943, the Reichsfuhrer SS issued through the higher SS and Policeführer East at Krakow his order to complete the combing out of the Warsaw Ghetto with the greatest severity and relentless tenacity. I therefore decided to destroy the entire Jewish residential area by setting every block on fire, including the blocks of residential buildings near the armament works. One concern after the other was systematically evacuated and subsequently destroyed by fire. The Jews then emerged from their hiding places and dugouts in almost every case. Not infrequently, the Jews stayed in the burning buildings until, because of the heat and the fear of being burned alive, they preferred to jump down from the upper stories after having thrown mattresses and other upholstered articles into the street from the burning building. With their bones broken, they still tried to crawl across the street into blocks of buildings which had not yet been set on fire or were only partially inflamed. Often the Jews changed their hiding places during the night by moving into the ruins of burned out buildings, taking refuge there until they were found by our patrols. Their stay in the sewers also ceased to be pleasant after the first week. Frequently from the street, we could hear loud voices coming through the sewer shafts. Then the men of the Waffen SS, the police, or the Wehrmacht engineers courageously climbed down the shafts to bring out the Jews. And not infrequently, they then stumbled over Jews already dead or were shot at. It was always necessary to use smoke candles to drive out the Jews. Thus, one day, we opened 183 sewer entrance holes and at a fixed time lowered smoke candles into them, with the result that the bandits fled from what they believed to be gas in the center of the former ghetto, where they could then be pulled out of the sewer holes there. A great number of Jews who could not be counted were exterminated by blowing up sewers and dugouts. The longer the resistance lasted, the tougher the men of the Waffen SS, police, and Wehrmacht became. They fulfilled their duty indefatigably in faithful comradeship and stood together as models and examples of soldiers. Their duty hours often lasted from early morning until late at night. At night, search patrols with rags wound around their feet remained at the heels of the Jews and gave them no respite. Not infrequently, they caught and killed Jews who used the night hours for supplementing their stores from abandoned dugouts and for contacting neighboring groups or exchanging news with them. Considering that the great part of the men of the Waffen SS had only been trained for 3 to 4 weeks before being assigned to this action, high credit should be given to the pluck, courage, and devotion to duty which they showed. It must be stated that the Wehrmacht engineers, too, executed the blowing up of dugouts, sewers, and concrete buildings with indefatigability and great devotion to duty. Officers and men of the police, a large part of whom had already been at the front, again excelled by their dashing spirit. Only through the continuous and untiring work of all involved did we succeed in catching a total of 56,065 Jews whose extermination can be proved. To this should be added the number of Jews who lost their lives in explosions or fires, but whose numbers could not be ascertained.
Major Walsh, in the connection that you're just upon now, oughtn't you to read the opening paragraphs of this document, which set out the amount of the losses of the German troops?
I will do so, sir. For the Fuhrer and their country, the following fell in the battle for the destruction of Jews and bandits in the former ghetto of Warsaw. 15 names are thereafter listed. Furthermore, the Polish police sergeant, Julian Zielinski, born 13 November 1891, 8th Commissariat, fell on 19 April 1943 while fulfilling his duty. They gave their utmost, their lives. We shall never forget them. The following were wounded. Then follows the names of 60 Waffen-SS personnel, 11 watchmen from training camps, probably Lithuanians, 12 security police officers in SS units, 5 men of the Polish police, and 2 regular army personnel, engineers. Permit me to read some brief excerpts of the daily teletype reports. Page 13 of the translation. From the teletype message of 22 April 1943, I read. Our setting the block on fire achieved the result in the course of the night that those Jews whom we had not been able to find despite all our search operations left their hideouts under the roofs, in the cellars and elsewhere, and appeared on the outside of the buildings, trying to escape the flames. Masses of them, entire families, were already aflame and jumped from the windows or endeavored to let themselves down by means of sheets tied together or the like. Steps had been taken so that these Jews, as well as the remaining ones, were liquidated at once. And from page 28 of the translation, first part of the last part of the first paragraph, I read. When the blocks of buildings mentioned above were destroyed, 120 Jews were caught, and numerous Jews were destroyed when they jumped from the attics to the inner courtyards, trying to escape the flames. Many more Jews perished in the flames or were destroyed when the dugouts and sewer entrances were blown up. And on page 30, second half of the second paragraph, I read. Not until the blocks of buildings were well aflame and were about to collapse did a further considerable number of Jews emerge, forced to do so by the flames and the smoke. Time and again, the Jews tried to escape even through burning buildings. Innumerable Jews whom we saw on the roofs during the conflagration perished in the flames. Others emerged from the upper stories in the last possible moment and were only able to escape death in the flames by jumping down. Today we caught a total of 2,283 Jews, of whom 204 were shot, and innumerable Jews were destroyed in dugouts and in the flames. And from page 34, the second paragraph, I read, beginning the second line, the Jews testify that they emerge at night to get fresh air, since it is unbearable to stay permanently within the dugouts owing to the long duration of the operation. On the average, the raiding parties shoot 30 to 50 Jews each night. From these statements, it was to be inferred that a considerable number of Jews are still underground in the ghetto. Today, we blew up a concrete building which we had not been able to destroy by fire. In this operation, we learned that the blowing up of a building is a very lengthy process and takes an enormous amount of explosive. The best and only method for destroying the Jews, therefore, still remains the setting of fire. And from page 35, the last part of the second paragraph, I read, some dispositions speak of 3,000 to 4,000 Jews who still remain in underground holes, sewers, and dugouts. The undersigned is resolved not to terminate the large-scale operation until the last Jew has been destroyed. And from the teletype message of 15 May 1945, 43, on page 44, we gather that the operation is in its last stage. I read the end of the first paragraph, page 44. A special unit once more searched the last block of buildings which was still intact in the ghetto and subsequently destroyed it. In the evening, the chapel, mortuary, and all other buildings in the Jewish cemetery were blown up or destroyed by fire. On 24 May 1943, the final figures have been compiled by Major General Stroop. He reports on page 45, last paragraph. Of the total of 56,065 caught, about 7,000 were destroyed in the former ghetto during large-scale operation. 6,929 Jews were destroyed by transporting them to T2, which we believe to be Treblinka Camp number 2, which will later be referred to. The sum total of Jews destroyed is therefore 13,929. Beyond the number of 56,065, an estimated number of 5,000 to 6,000 Jews were destroyed by being blown up or by perishing in the flames. The court has noted within the report 1061 PS a number of photographs. And with the court's permission, I should like to show a few of these photographs, still pictures, on the screen, unless the court believes that reference to the original text will be sufficient for the court's purpose.
No, if you want to put them on the screen, you may do so.
Thanks.
I'd like to have the adjournment.
Perhaps it would be convenient to adjourn now, and then you can put them on the screen afterwards.
Thank you, sir.
This is good. This is good.